and get started here this afternoon. So welcome everybody to a Dignified Learning webinar. Today we're talking about learning to avoid the biggest mistakes when choosing an e-learning platform. This is a big topic and we're excited to dig into it with you. My name's Matthew Worthen. I'm a vice president at Next Step and a co-founder of Dignified Learning. With me is Emily Miller. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Matt. I'm also a vice president at Next Step, and I oversee our Dignified Learning department. I come at this webinar from a different perspective in that I'm not a technical expert by any stretch of the imagination when it comes to platforms, but I see it through the lens of wanting to provide high quality training opportunities, and to do that, you really do need a platform. So I'm excited to delve into this today and talk through our shared experiences with this.
Great. So just a quick introduction about the companies that we represent. So Next Step is an IT managed service provider. We're in Southwest Ohio, and we are really an IT company for the community. We work with lots of nonprofits and local governments and schools. We're a quickly growing IT company in Southwest Ohio, but we have been in business for over 35 years. So happy to help anyone out with IT questions as well, although that's not necessarily the topic of this webinar. We have plenty to talk about today. Always happy to hear, though, if you have any IT-related things that come up. And Dignified Learning is our brand for custom e-learning. So this is really a new brand for us, but it represents this idea that we want e-learning to be accessible and fun and relevant to everybody that needs to participate in the learning process.
So when we think about dignified learning and kind of what we like to consider ourselves as the one-stop shop when you're trying to transition to e-learning. So we help you with everything from figuring out the right platform to designing the custom courses that go into that platform if you need that support, and figuring out all of the nuances along the way to really making a dignified online learning experience. I think we all know what it's like to be put into an online learning environment where maybe you're uncertain on how to navigate the tools, or it's not the most engaging thing in the world. And so we really take a unique approach and try to think through the lens of how can we make this the most productive, engaging experience from start to finish. And that includes everything from the platform experience to the actual content that the learner is going to be consuming.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about the last part here, the host and house content. That's an exciting piece that we're really going to jump in today when we're talking about choosing the right learning platform. So as always, we have a freebie here for webinar attendees. Emily, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so stay tuned. At the end of the webinar, we're going to talk to you about how to get access to a really helpful guide we put together on how you can prioritize your e-learning platform needs. If you have ever ventured into the learning platform marketplace, you know that it's very crowded, and a lot of learning platforms are built for academic institutions. So if you're not a school and you're not a very large company, there really isn't a lot of space for you to determine which platform is going to fit me. And even if you are a school or a large business, in all honesty, those platforms are really complex. And if you're not familiar with what exactly they do and how they work, there's so many features, and this guide will really help you narrow in and say, okay, these are the features that we have to have. These would be the features that would be nice to have. These are the non-negotiables. These are some of the less desirable things that we need to think about. But it just gives you a really good starting place for finding the right platform.
Yeah, and like always, the resources that we build and make available for free are inspired by our real world experience and things we wish we had in our own process for shopping for e-learning platforms earlier on in our careers and the different positions we've had. We've wanted these resources, and so today we're just so happy to put one more of those out into the world. So hopefully you find some value there and can participate. So let's jump into some learning objectives for today, our topic today. So let's talk about how to avoid the biggest mistakes that we see most organizations make when choosing an e-learning platform. We're going to identify the most important things to consider when selecting that platform. We're going to learn what an e-learning platform is and know when you might need one. And, you don't always need one. And that's something we're really excited to talk to you about today. We want to make sure you go shopping for the right thing. Learn how to host an e-learning experience without an e-learning platform. That's an interesting subject that we'll also jump into. And as I've seen more attendees join, please just remember to use the chat box today if you have any questions for us. So the first thing we really want to address is, what is an e-learning experience? And I think this is something that every organization might define differently, and every person that is responsible for training or coaching, they have their own ideas for, what comes to mind when you think about e-learning. I think that's an important place to start. What are we defining as e-learning, and what are we trying to put out there for others to absorb and partake in? What is that experience going to look like? What kind of details are going to be there? What is that experience of the learner? Where do they start and where do they stop, and what's along the way that helps represent the information we're trying to disseminate to people. So, Emily, always feel free to jump in too as we move along today. But for me, when I think of an e-learning experience, I think about, all of the positive times I've logged in or participated in online learning. And I also think of the things that haven't gone well. And, if you're an organization that is limited on resources, then we love to talk to you, because we are so mindful about where you should put your budget dollars and how you should make e-learning come to life. You don't have to have big, deep pockets to make a really positive e-learning experience happen.
Yeah, I think an e-learning experience can be as narrow or as broad as you want it to be. And like you said, we all have our wide spectrums. Some of us have taken online, classes through a university and think of that. But I would encourage you to kind of stretch that imagination as we talk through this. And, how many times have you gone to YouTube and found a really helpful video tutorial on something? That in of itself is an e-learning experience. So when we think about online learning and learning through that medium, for us, especially through the lens of platforms, we really want to talk about, well, okay, we can have all these online learning experiences, but how do we organize them for learners? How do we keep track of them? How do we not just present information in pockets and isolated, but how do we present information in a really unified way that connects concepts, that serves as a place where a learner can go to reference and find the resources that they need? And those who are responsible for overseeing training have the data that they need to know, who is engaging in that e-learning experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we start to think about the who's going to participate, who are our learners, who's showing up, we start to think about, where are they going? Where are they starting? And that's so much of the conversation today. Why are e-learning platforms necessary? What is their place in this journey? And that's another important question for you to ask yourself and your organization. Is an e-learning platform necessary? What problem are we solving with the platform? And really be mindful about that. Take that information out of your brain, meet with the other key stakeholders in your organization, say, what are we really, really trying to do at the end of the day? Is it data that we want to get back? Is it just accessibility? Are there compliance pieces? There's so much to that conversation that can help build not only the story of why you need an e-learning platform, but what is the most appropriate platform to choose to help meet your goals and respect your budget. So we're going to talk a little bit about e-learning platforms and why do we have the term e-learning platform if we already know what a learning management system is? So if we already have an LMS, or already know what an LMS is, we like to just discuss the idea that you can deliver e-learning in a lot of different ways. You can house this content in a lot of different ways. And working with our clients that have an interest in e-learning, oftentimes we're looking at kind of either this category of shared drive. They say, yeah, we have a lot of content. It's already on Office 365. It's already on Google Drive. Do I really need to do anything different? The other thing we hear is kind of in this category of videos. Maybe you've created video content, or you have your favorite video content that you've collected across the internet. You say, all right, I've got my content. I've got these videos. I can email those links out, right? I can just drive traffic to those videos. So we can talk about the differences there and some of the pitfalls and things to consider when we get into using, OneDrive or Google Drive as your e-learning platform, or using YouTube or Vimeo as that platform. There's things to consider along the way. But another one that oftentimes almost gets missed is using your website for your e-learning platform. What content should be on your website that someone can launch and experience either publicly or in a protected way? And then lastly, we'll talk about learning management systems. This is the most common way to house online content. And there's a very busy, crowded marketplace of learning management systems out there. And we can hopefully identify some of the look-fors today that can inspire thought when you're LMS shopping.
So for people who are not familiar with e-learning platforms or LMSs, I want you to think for a moment about whatever your online content is that you want to share that will become your e-learning experience. So that could be a video, that could be an e-learning course. I want you to think about that like it's in a moving box, and you get to decide where you're going to house it. Where is that going to live? So like Matt said, those files oftentimes can live in a shared drive. They can live in a website. They can live in a learning management system. They can even live on YouTube and be a free and accessible video. So just kind of keep that mental framework as we work through this. I find that really helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. So taking that last graphic and organizing these in a few ways. When we think about videos, links, and shared drives, those things that we've just uploaded and now we have a link to them. The things that we want to make sure you're considering is that you're going to receive very little evidence that learning actually has taken place. That is, that someone has actually consumed the information, retained it, and can now apply it, right? You're not really going to be presented any evidence that is taking place on any of these platforms like Google Drive and OneDrive and YouTube. So if that is an important criteria, maybe how you're funded if you're a nonprofit, or if you're an organization with a compliance need, keep that in mind, that evidence of learning is something you may need to really identify. What are we looking to get back? The next one is behavioral change. This is so important. Anytime we're tasked to train someone else or to invite a learner in to absorb information. And at Dignified Learning, we refer to learners as anyone receiving information that they're expected to understand, right? So we don't talk about learners just being in school. We talk about learners being anybody in any organization that's expected to receive information, which is really all of us, right? We're all learners, professionally, personally. And so when we talk about behavioral change, it's important that we may expect certain things to be outcomes of a learning experience, right? Not even specific to e-learning, but anytime you train someone, you're hoping that their behavior will change because they have this new information, they're empowered to apply it, and they understand what they learned and why it's important. We oftentimes don't see the results we're looking for in these platforms in this category. And the last piece here we want to talk about is learner data. There's so little data that we can actually aggregate or make good decisions on from YouTube, right? Unless you're just trying to monetize a YouTube channel and you're looking for ad dollars, you're not really going to get any other data than that from an experience like that. So again, just if you're finding those valuable resources, let's talk about what you can do with them in a way that inspires change, that can collect some important data, and you might be able to get some evidence back. So then we move into the next category here. Thinking about repurposing your organization's website. There's so much we can do with websites. They're so adaptable, and we can be very, very creative in this space. Not only can we upload courses and house that content, we have an opportunity for behavior change. And when we look at moving e-learning content to a website, there's some very technical things that you might want to pay attention to in that process. We're not going to jump into all of the details there as far as how to package up an e-learning experience and move it to your website. So if you're interested in that subject, please let us know. But what we find with websites is we're still missing the learner data component. And that is usually the primary purpose for a learning management system. So one of the key takeaways today is if you're not specifically looking for learner data, you may have a more cost-effective way to represent your information online. LMSs are beautiful, though. They do lots of things well, and they were originally built for an education setting. And some of them are still absolutely geared towards that market. So when you're looking at learning management systems, and we'll jump into this here in a moment, we want to talk about why a specific LMS is the right fit for you. So when we look at that evidence of learning, the ability to upload courses and house content and change behavior and collect data, all of those categories really should be thought through. What are those criteria? What are those outcomes that you are looking for out of these investment dollars, right? Because your organization isn't going to receive any of these services for free. You're either going to invest money or time into creating a good, positive e-learning experience. So if we start with the lens of what am I trying to achieve and who's going to show up and actually use this stuff, then we can get an opportunity to identify, is that best suited for YouTube, or is that something we can use our website for? Or do we really need to get into the LMS marketplace and take a look at what's going on out there?
I just want to pause for a second and come back. Matt talked a lot about behavior change. And when we say behavior change, we're not saying that, if you buy the right platform, everyone in your organization will be on the same page instantaneously. However, if you're looking for what are the prerequisites of behavior change, what do we need to have to shift culture? Well, one of the first things you need to be doing is putting in place a learning experience where your learners can absorb information, process information, have a place to reference the information so that they can first absorb it, and then act on it. And what we find in our experience is, when organizations try to use videos and links and shared drives, and they're not compiling all of that training into one cohesive experience that builds on itself, that teaches learners the foundational concepts, and then gradually presents the content in a more sophisticated way that they can understand it. If we don't have those prerequisites in place, then it just gets lost. It gets lost in the shuffle. People know it's on the shared drive somewhere, but it's not convenient. I don't have time to go search for it. But if you have a website or an LMS, and that's the dedicated home that people can use as a resource, that really can be a real game changer when you're looking to see some real positive return on training and see that behavioral shift.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. So, how do you know if you need an e-learning platform at all? What do we need to be thinking about that even says, do we need an e-learning platform? And keep in mind, and we talked about this in our last webinar, we use the term e-learning platform because that covers all of these categories. So we're not saying e-learning platform is just a learning management system. We're saying, what is that platform? Do you need one? And what does it look like based on these criteria? Are we looking for anywhere, anytime learning? Are we looking for just-in-time delivery of information? What does that look like for you and your organization? And a lot of that is built on expectations. What are the expectations of a learner? When are they going to be learning? What time is being set aside for that? And that is actually its own category we would love to talk about too, is the right way to present information in that mindset to absorb it, making sure that we're intentional with our time and we're giving learners the time and space they need to take on learning, no matter the platform, that they're able to receive it and they're able to work through the information at their pace and they feel supported in that process. That's so important.
Yeah, and when we're talking about e-learning platforms, I'm sure you're already using e-learning platforms. Everybody's gone to YouTube and looked up a video. But when is the moment in time where you need a dedicated e-learning platform where you're going to make the decision, okay, our training will live here? So this is always an interesting kind of middle ground that I'm excited for Matt to talk about, because so often when we meet with our clients, they're really excited about e-learning. They want to jump in, in their mind, they already have figured out that they think they're going to be spending tens of thousands of dollars on a dedicated LMS. And when we really sit down and evaluate with them, okay, well, what are your needs? What do you want to use it for? Sometimes they don't even need that. And we can really broaden their horizon as to what's possible. So talk us through what this looks like, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the question here is, can we host an e-learning experience? Meaning, by host, we're saying, can we make it available to people? Can we invite people into this content without a dedicated e-learning platform? Without creating a new website or buying a learning management system? Is there a way to do that? The answer is absolutely. We love to think creatively about the ways that we can publish information online and ask others to participate in that learning process. The first thing we need to think about is, what are we uploading? What content do we have? And is it suitable to send the way it is? Or do we need to transform that information in any way? Oftentimes the content that we have that's ready to go to be printed and put in those nice glossy folders and handed out aren't oftentimes the best format to upload online. We expect our learners to interact online differently than they do in person. And so we need to take a really close look at that content. Is it ready to go or not? It is our absolute job and passion here at Dignified Learning to help you answer that question. So if you have content and you're not sure what to do with it, that's PowerPoints, PDFs, Could be existing talking head videos or recordings of meetings, anything like that. Let's take a really close look at that content and see, is that ready to go as is, or should we transform that information to best be suitable online? So if we get through that process and we're confident that we have the right content, it's in the right format, and it's ready to go, then we need to think about what's really going to happen when a learner gets the information. Do we expect them to learn independently on their own, or are they going to have a requirement to interact with you, the instructor, or with each other during the learning process? The next part is access. How do your learners want to access your information? Is that on their mobile phone, on their own time at home, or is that on your work computer that's been assigned to them? Let's talk about the easiest way to deliver that information, present it to them, and also, when we know those things, we can go back and do a QC check. We can check the quality of the content and really make sure that it's being delivered in the way that you hope it is. So, what do they need to be successful in hosting information online in this way? Well, one of the pieces that we can talk about is the difference between your audience as an internal learner and your audience as an external learner. What does that look like? And so here's some high kind of topical examples of what we're talking about. Internal learners oftentimes need technology training. They need to learn how to use something that is just for them and their role in your organization. That is specific to them. That is an internal training. Also, onboarding training, when you invite new people to participate in your organization. Those are things that are very specific to your people. When we talk about external users, though, there's so many fun, creative ways to use e-learning. And this is where your website can really come to life in a new way that you don't need a learning management system to do. Think about your web presence, your sales process. What are you asking organizations or individuals to purchase from you or to partner on you with? Look at that process and find that space that you can provide some additional education content. What I really mean is, today, your buyers, those consumers out there that are looking for your information, want to do research on their own. They want to be educated before they have to talk to a representative of your organization. So what is the best way to educate your prospects? We believe you can use e-learning experiences right on your website to do that. You can also use that to invite new clients in, right? They might not have a login to a protected system, but you can have this information on your website in a way that new clients can access. Another is really exciting, and that's volunteer training. Gosh, how many volunteers are out in the world that need information, and especially now, they need it in a new way. We can't all sit in the conference room and have lunch together. So how can we use e-learning on our website to invite people to volunteer for our organization, if that applies to you? And then we can talk about using your website as an e-learning store. Do you want to monetize your content? Is there any audience that is looking to buy access to this information? And your website is the best place to go for that as well. The common themes here are, what are we trying to manage and transform? And that is going to be universal, no matter if that's internal or external.
So just want to pause for a second here and talk through for a minute. We're talking about a lot of complex ideas when it comes to e-learning. So Matt just talked a lot about sort of the content and the actual makeup of that e-learning experience and how you're going to use it creatively inside of a platform. So usually in this process, when we're working with our clients, they come to us and they're thinking squarely about their internal users, right? They need to onboard new employees, or they need to provide ongoing professional development for certifications. Training is just kind of an ongoing necessity, and it's a pain point, and it's just one of those nagging things that they know they want to improve and change the culture with internally. But when we sit down and we really talk through, okay, well, once you go down this path, you actually have so many more opportunities to use your platform. And when we talk about the external users, that's usually something that takes a little bit of time to process, and it's great for that individual we're working with to go back and talk to their stakeholders and say, gosh, how could we have an easier, better experience for the community that we serve, or for, like Matt said, for our clients. And when you start going and asking those questions, you get some really interesting responses. And it's still one of those things that's exciting for us, because a lot of times the creative solutions that come back to us that we're asked to kind of dream up, we ourselves have never really thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the next piece here is, how do we support whatever decision we're making? If we choose a learning management system versus just, using our website or finding a custom solution, we need to make sure we're answering all of these questions so that we're not surprised later that there's a higher cost of ownership than we anticipated. The first category is, what kinds of questions will our learners have? And what are we going to do about those questions? Are they going to have IT related, like, how do I access this? My sound isn't working. I can't get my browser to launch your training. Do you anticipate those? And how are we sharing with our team that we expect some of these requests to be coming in? And then there's the question of managing users. We have to get our users in the system. Some platforms have self-enrollment options. Others are totally open to the public, so there doesn't need a user account to access the information. But if we have content we want to protect, how are we going to do that? How are we going to make sure the right learners are getting the right information? Which dovetails into the next question, learners being enrolled or unenrolled from courses. Is that an action we need to consider? Most platforms out there have the ability to share information with specific individuals, but are we making sure that that information is also being unenrolled when it's appropriate? And how are we going to identify when that learning journey comes to a stop? When should they lose that access? When should it be revoked? So when we're thinking through this process of managing requests, updating or editing users, enrolling or unenrolling from information, and then ultimately what happens when they're done? When you're done at the end of that road, are you getting a certificate? Are you supplying some evidence that you've participated in learning and that you can actually go out and apply what you've been expected to learn? That's really important. And there's an art and a science really to all of these things. And at Dignified Learning, we have professionals that would love to talk to you about all of these categories and more when it comes to administering your e-learning platform. But please keep in mind these questions as you're out there shopping and looking for the right solution that's going to fit your organization.
So when we talk about the biggest mistakes, we've touched on overbuying, right? Spending much more than you actually need to for your needs. And then this is the second biggest mistake. And this is the one that is the most upsetting to me, because we see organizations and they invest hard-earned dollars into their platform. And it is a beautiful platform. It functions. It is state of the art, but they are a small organization, and everyone is constantly doing more with less, and they don't have a tremendous staff on, that can absorb this additional work. And this is something that when the sales rep for LMSs comes in, they're usually focused on, here's the learner's journey. Here's what the learner's login looks like. Here's how the learner gets access to a course. and they don't discuss the back end of that, right? The administration and the maintenance for that platform. And oftentimes, if you're buying a really elaborate platform, that could be a full-time job in of itself, is making sure that someone is there to create the content, to upload that information to the LMS, to support users, to issue login credentials. Think about every time you have a new learner that needs to be enrolled and who's going to take that on. And oftentimes, if you have organizations that are just shorthanded and they don't have the resources for that, they've purchased an LMS, but it just doesn't get implemented and utilized.
Yeah. So when we look at those big mistakes, overspending, oh my gosh, please, this is one that hits home to us because we're entrusted with our clients' dollars. And when we go and find the right solution, we want to make sure that you're spending just the right amount of money on that solution. Overspending is a huge problem. And one of the reasons why this problem happens or occurs is because these platforms, these learning management systems, are built for schools and they have models for that. And so they're trying to fit those models into the corporate world, and your organization might not be the ideal customer for them. And so you're buying your way into a platform that might not even be the right platform for you. The other one here is, realizing you need features after you bought a platform. Hey, that sales rep was great. I sent him the check and now I'm in, and I don't have everything I really needed. That is so important, to identify as much as possible early on. And the counterbalance to that is we don't want to buy more stuff than we need either, right? So the opposite side of that effect is overbuying features that we're not even going to end up using.
So let's talk for a minute about what these actually look like. What are some practical examples of this? So when you're saying features that you may not need, if you're let's say not an academic institution and you're not issuing grades, you probably don't need a grade book. But if you're purchasing an LMS that has a grade book, you're probably paying a premium for that feature. Another example that's really common that I've seen clients overlook during the sales process, and then once they have that LMS purchased, they regret that they didn't really take a hard look at the features. If you're imagining that your learners are going to log into their platform and have a discussion board and get to process through topics together, a lot of LMSs don't have that feature. Or they might have that feature, but it goes back to the administration. Well, who's going to be overseeing that, monitoring that discussion board, making sure that learners are posting to it? So there's a variety of things you have to really think about when you're talking about features. And another one that is so important and really close to my heart as a former educator is there are platforms that are inaccessible to many learners, and you have to consider who your learners are and who they might be, especially if you're providing this for an employee or for a potential client. Well, you want to make sure that all those accessibility features are there, that the ADA accommodations you might be asked to provide are there. And those sales reps you're going to be talking to are not experts at ADA law. They might know some basic compliance terminology that they can throw out there. But, if you're talking about using your platform to put in certain content, they may not be able to really drill down and answer how that content's going to interact and work inside of their platform. And then you might not actually have an accessible platform to learners that have disabilities or, some other type of issue that might make it inaccessible.
Yeah, absolutely, Emily. And this fourth square here is considering where are you going to create your content that's going into this platform. Don't buy the platform thinking that it's going to also provide the method for creating content. In many ways it does not. And so we really want to be intentional about that experience, not only from an accessibility perspective, but also, from your content to begin with. What are you looking to make? And if you aren't even sure where to begin, we've talked about a lot of concepts today, and there's so much going on in the world of e-learning and platforms. That's why Dignified Learning exists. So we want to talk to you about what's going on in your organization so we can help you navigate all of these complex topics. So, when we land here and say, what are your options? What is this home? If you're going to go shopping for a new house for your content, where do you even begin? Well, we have a few options that we would love to talk to you about. One is that we will build and manage a whole new website and destination for learning, if that's what you need. And that is really predicated based on some wish list items and some things that you might not find that other solutions are going to have out of the box. We talk about overbuying or underbuying. This solution really says, let's start with that wish list, see if we can find it out in the world. But chances are you're not going to find the exact solution that only has the things that your organization needs. We can build that for you. The second solution here is we invite clients into dignifiedlearning.com. We have a learning management system here at Dignified Learning that we love to co-brand and extend to your organization. We can talk to you about that. But if you're saying, you know what, I'm not really sure, let's just dig into this together. We love to go LMS shopping. So we will work with you to understand your needs, your wants, your have-to-haves, and your non-negotiables. And we'll go out into the world and set up demos of different platforms for you so that you can show up with a short list and really be able to process through some of the best options that we can find out there so that at the end of the day, you're spending your money in the best possible way.
Yeah, and I will say with that LMS shopping option, we are going to not only set up those demos for you, but we're gonna first talk to you about what your needs are. We're gonna identify those, and then we're going to strategically pick the best platforms out there that we know of that align with those needs. And I think the most valuable part of an engagement like that is when we are meeting with the sales rep, when we are going through the demo process and the trial period. We know the questions you need to ask, that you'll forget to ask, that maybe you're not even aware that you need to ask. And hearing those answers and really helping to clarify and compare apples to apples when you're talking about features and different LMS choices. That's one of the favorite things that we really enjoy doing, is because we can make the process so straightforward for the client so that they can clearly see what their options are and where they want to invest.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you have any questions for us, feel free to use the Zoom chat box. But also, if you're watching this after it's already been recorded, we would love to hear from you. And we'll give you our email address here in a few minutes.
On our next webinar, which will be happening in March, we're going to be talking about how to make complex ideas easy to understand. So today we really took a deep dive into the e-learning platform discussion. Next time, we're going to be talking more about how you create that e-learning experience, how you break down those training topics, and whether you're designing a full-on training program for your learners, or you're simply just trying to send an email and communicate better, or have a presentation that is coming up that you really need your audience to understand. We're going to be talking about some very practical strategies that are easy to implement, that don't require a great deal of time or energy, but can really help you clarify your message. Because, like Matt said earlier, every time you're presenting new information, you're asking someone to learn. And you need good teaching strategies when you're trying to do that.
Absolutely. So visit us at dignifiedlearning.com. You can hit us up on Facebook and Instagram. And for your freebie, Emily, what's the best way for them to access that?
Yeah, so it's very easy. If you go to dignifiedlearning.com, you'll see a free resource section. And on that page, you'll see a handout on how to prioritize your e-learning platform needs. If you are just getting started, or if you're already down the line and looking at LMSs, it's a good tool you can use to really sit down and, like we were talking about earlier, what questions are you not going to know to ask, or what features are you not going to know to think about until after you've purchased and you're really using it. That guide will help give you some direction and hopefully prevent you from overlooking important parts of that LMS process.
Well, fantastic. I hope all of you get to take advantage of that free resource. And again, we love making resources that we wish we had. So if you have ideas for that, we would love to hear from you on social media. And you can always visit us at dignifiedlearning.com and give us your feedback on our Dignified Learning wall, when you can share with us what dignified learning means to you and share a positive learning experience that you've had. So thanks everyone for your time today. And we look forward to